you were saying earlier something about level playing field. How is the field unlevel right now? What are some of the challenges and what are the remedies that COCOPEA is proposing?
Oh, that's a very long discussion. We'll talk about leveling
Let's
the
say the
playing field.
unlevel playing field. What are some of the points? I
Yeah.
know that COCOPEA has made statements, for instance, about the rising pay for public school teachers. And of course, no one argues that teachers deserve good pay, right? But there's more to that. But maybe you can give COCOPEA's part.
Yeah, but first of all, when we talk about leveling of the playing field in terms of policies, I think the
Mm,
major difference of, uh, of regulating public schools and regulating private schools is a lack of accountability mechanisms
mm,
in the public education sector, more than what we're experiencing in the private education sector. You see, if you establish an educational institution, if you establish a private school, you are first you have to get a permit from either DepEd or CHED in order to operate the program. And even once you get that recognition, once you get that permit, you are under constant monitoring, etc., regulatory powers, administrative powers of these agencies. And if you fail to satisfy that, you'll be closed. So you are
mm.
under close scrutiny. You have there's regulation.
And
But in terms of for
public schools don't have that.
they don't
That
have
type
that.
of oversight. Okay.
They don't have that because under the law, this is a very old law, the Education Act. The government schools are established by law, created by law, and the program offerings are automatically authorized or granted simultaneous to creation. Unlike in the private education sector, you have to establish based on corporate or SEC rules, but the offering of the programs, you have to get it, you have to apply for it, and then of
Mm.
course the power to grant includes the power to withdraw, and so there's a constant regulation. So I think that's where the unlevel playing comes in. You have different dynamics and issues in its implementation, but I think that's the cause of the unlevel playing field. I
I
think if we put in place some quality assurance measures also in the public school system, I think the quality of education will really improve in our country because public and private institutions would compete in terms of quality, not in
Right.
terms of government support.
So how come that is not happening? What is the where is the resistance coming from? Is it bureaucracy? Is it in the legal side? And because nobody can argue about quality. I mean, parents who send their children to public schools, whether in basic ed or in higher ed, of course they want their children not only to have the academic degrees, but also all of the perks that come with a degree, such as employability and productivity of that person. Why is it not happening? Why is no one imposing these higher standards of quality, as you said, on the public side?
Yeah, I think because our major problem before are on the access of
Mm,
students to education. So I think we were burdened by that. Our government has to prioritize that, has to make sure first that it is able to reach out to school children of school age and make sure they go to school, um, providing more public schools for them to reach those who are hard to reach in the parts of
mm,
the country. And only now, in the recent years, especially when we passed this K to 12 law, it is only now that we are also made aware of serious concerns on quality. And in fact, before the ECQ, we're having some development in this aspect in terms of the legislature addressing this policy concern. March 5, we had this hearing at the Senate with the committee chair, Committee on Education chair, Senator Gatchalian, Win Gatchalian. He called for a hearing on complementarity of education. So we were all there, the private education representatives as well as as officials of the public school system. So we were talking all about this, but again, suddenly the ECQ happened. But I
Mm,
think that dialogue should continue.
mm. And I think some people may be surprised that the private sector, through the initiatives of COCOPEA's former chairman, Father Joel Tabora, now the president of Ateneo de Davao, had actually started dialogue also. Is that correct? With the private sector and state colleges and universities. Can you tell about that? That is continuing now, even after Father Joel's term as chairman, right?
Yes, that is one of Father Joel's legacy in COCOPEA, providing a platform of conversation and dialogue with the higher education institutions, the state universities and colleges, and the private higher education institutions. So we were talking about matters where we can complement each other's efforts, and how we can maintain the same level of quality across education institutions, which is actually very good. And we're continuing with that dialogue.
Right, and in the few meetings I've attended in that dialogue, I got the impression that the SUCs are very willing to work with the private sector. In fact, some of the private sector's positions are very similar to the concerns also of the SUCs. Is that your impression as well?
Yes, that's correct. One of the major achievements of that dialogue is that their agreement to focus on the agreement of the SUCs to focus on courses and programs that are needed by the country, but not necessarily popular to students,
Hmm.
or are of commercial value. Because they don't need income from tuition because they're fully tuition funded, and
Right,
they can actually continue with courses that are unsubscribed
right.
in the recent years, which also the private education sector cannot just offer, because again it relies on tuition funding. So
Right.
if it is unsubscribed, it cannot continue.
Right. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So the problem is not with the private sector. The SUCs are receptive to your ideas. Maybe the problem is with Congress or somewhere else in government.
That's always part of it, because state universities and colleges, it is also governed by its own charter. They
Right.
all have their own laws, and of course, they're also into political districts.
Right.
And a lot
Right.
of the, yeah, has
And it's not
something to do with their operation.
and it gets more complicated because it's not just one level of government, like the national government that looks after SUCs, but also local governments with local colleges. And sometimes, you add them to the mix and you have a much more complicated situation. For instance, in Manila, you have PLM, you have Universidad de Manila, and both city colleges, but they're seem to be offering this similar subjects or similar degrees. And then on top of that, they seem to be also competing with private schools also in Manila for the very same areas or branches of discipline. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any complementarity, at least in Manila, where I'm familiar with.
That's correct. We're hoping to also to bring into that conversation the local colleges and universities. In the local government education also has a different policy environment, because putting up an education institution in the locality is also one of the revenue sources of a local government unit, which also is part of the powers and functions of the local government. But they have to also take into consideration the role of the private education institutions in their communities. Sometimes the local schools are situated right in front of the private schools, and
Hmm.
are competing with students, and then depriving the private schools of its needed resources in order to thrive, because again it is fully tuition funded.
All right, but how do we solve the case, for instance, and I don't know how unique this is, for the case of, for instance, of UP, which is, a public institution, um, and by mentioning that, my understanding is that it should benefit the most deserving of the people who can't afford a good education. But a school like UP, because of the quality it provides, attracts many more students who can actually afford to pay tuition in Ateneo or La Salle or some other public university. Aren't underprivileged but deserving students being crowded out of that school?
Yeah, that is really a major issue, not only in UP, but this is also happening in other state universities and colleges. This is one issue that this law, RA 10931, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education, also intended to address, that those deserving, qualified students should be prioritized, and that those who can afford should not be getting the slots of the poor and deserving students. But I think in UP, it's very hard to implement that for some reason. But
Yeah,
yeah, this is being addressed because of that law now.
yeah. The
Because the
joke
problem
there.
is when the those who can afford crowd out the poor students. The poor students are forced to the private education institution, and when they cannot pay, it becomes a problem
An issue. Yeah.
also in the institution, and it becomes also unpopular when private schools complain that students are not paying, right? So paying.
Mm.
So yeah, it goes hand in hand in resolving this problem.
Yeah, maybe if we can talk about that a little bit, because people seem to have a negative reaction. They cringe a little bit when schools try to impose a no permit, no exam policy. But a lot of them conveniently forget that the private schools have to pay salaries, have to spend on facilities, have to invest on growing those facilities, and of course, the government doesn't give them money. So how can they do those things, deliver quality education if there will be laws like no permit, no exam that will essentially undercut them.
Yeah, education, quality education has a cost, as we all know. And if the students are not willing to pay, or if the schools are constrained to offer education only at the minimum cost, then we will not be able to innovate and deliver quality education beyond what the government prescribes in its minimum standard. And I think this issue on payment of tuition should be resolved in the respective schools, and should not be subject of legislation, because if a legislation is passed where schools are prohibited from withholding or refusing exams because of unpaid tuition, even those who can pay would no longer pay,
Mm.
and of course this will cause the more problems, viability problems for education institutions if nobody pays their tuition.
Right. Right, and to be clear, and I think a lot of people don't understand this. The assistance to private education, most of it, I think, through the voucher program, does not go to the school. It goes to the students. Is that correct?
Yes, these are tuition subsidies. So it's actually for them, but
Hmm.
it is released to the school to make sure that the school is also paid. Because if you release this directly to the students, they may not pay the schools and use it for some other purpose.
Right. So the problem in many schools, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the value of those vouchers are in many cases not even sufficient to cover the tuition. Is that correct?
That's correct, because especially in basic education, it is not meant to cover the entire tuition of the students, but merely provide for subsidies. So those who avail of these subsidies are usually those who are in the poor mission schools, or those who are also in the lower income bracket. and not those who are enrolled in the bigger schools.
Mm. And how is the targeting done for those voucher systems?
It is actually based on first is the available budget for the number of slots.
Mm.
Then of course from there there will be it will be based on the economic or financial background of the families. But not only that, one major element there is that the school should be able to meet certain minimum standards of the Department of Education as enforced by the PAC, the Private
So
Education Assistance Committee.
so there are conditions. It's not just a flat out subsidy. But yeah, are you saying they have to do well in school? Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, the students should do well in school, and the school should also do well in the delivery of education, because
Ah,
otherwise they'll have to return the money, and the
eh,
students will also be disqualified if they don't perform well.
can you elaborate on that? What does the school have to do to qualify in receiving those or being part of that voucher system?
Yeah, basically they have to maintain a good standing as a recognized basic education under the Department of Education, and that they should also make sure that the slots given to them for students are fully utilized. Otherwise, they
Mm,
won't be given the same number of slots anymore, or it will be given to other institutions.
mm.
So
And
basically, that's what they have to do.
yeah, and you said that there was a delay. There's always a delay when it comes to the government releasing funding. But have they released the funding for those, for at least for the 2019-2020 school year?
Yeah, at least for last school year, that's already been released. There were some delays, but I think it's safe to say that for the last academic year, for the vouchers, they have already been released. But I
Mm,
think one subsidy related to that, which is the teacher salary subsidy, because teachers who are teaching in these accredited institutions, they're also receiving a subsidy. It has
mm.
not been fully released yet. They're also waiting for that.
All right, and I guess that's just a function of the government being bogged down with the pandemic, or is that just the regular bureaucracy that you guys face every year?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, so we're hoping that it will be released soon. This is for the teachers
Mm.
who are teaching in the private schools and teaching in GASPE schools. So we hope that this will also help in alleviating their situation right now.
Yeah, I only have a few minutes left, but I just want to ask. So, public schools are supposed to open August 24, and they're supposed to be starting the enrollment. What about the private sector? Are you guys doing the same now?
Yeah, where preparations are starting yesterday and today for for the school opening. So I think one of the priorities is disinfecting and cleaning
Mm,
the school so that the skeletal workforce will also be secure in terms of their health, and then putting in place the facilities and probably online also
mm,
services to do the enrollment registration, because of course the students would not be required to go to the schools to do the enrollment. So things like that. Prior to the COVID-19, I remember prior to school opening, the preparations are really into the physical facilities and preparation of the students reporting during the first school day, so coordination with local government, etc. But now it has evolved into something else. Preparation more on not allowing or at least reducing the physical requirements, not only of students but also of the school personnel in going to the schools. So technically, all schools are now allowed to do the enrollment first day of
mm.
June, and
I, Has there been any reports of schools that saying that they will not reopen because of business reasons, because they've been hit harder than other schools by this economic fallout?
Yes, there are several schools who approached me and the law office also in asking for help on how to close the school and what do they need to do
Wow,
to
wow,
implement the closing. That's very
wow,
unfortunate
wow, and that's because of the pandemic.
because of the pandemic. They're not expecting their enrollment to improve, and that a very small number of students, it will be impossible for them to continue.
How many schools are we talking about? Is that something that you can disclose, or maybe where these schools are at? I mean, probably not Metro Manila.
And they're not in Metro Manila. But in terms of the number who approached me, there's a very small number. But
Hmm.
when we did this survey, um, there's a big chunk of private schools who are saying that their resources can only last for 3 months. That was in May, starting April. So if there will be
Wow.
no government intervention, economic intervention, and based on their current resources, and the school would not be opening soon, they're really considering closing. So
Wow.
there's also around more than 40% of those who participated in the survey.
And how many participated in the survey?
Basically, majority of the almost more than half of the COCOPEA institutions. COCOPEA is composed of 2,000 member institutions.
Wow. That's really bad news. Well, I hope that there's some relief to their distress coming soon. Any other issues that you want to discuss with regard to education that I have not asked?
Probably just take this opportunity to to appeal to our legislators and to the government for support on behalf of our school personnel, because they have not been able to get financial support from the government from the start of the ECQ. The first assistance, the DOLES camp, should actually be given to all employees affected. The school personnel were not able to avail of that benefit. And when it was transferred to the Department of Finance under the Small Business Wage Subsidy, they were not also able to get. And the DOF
Mm,
categorically said that education is not one of
wow.
uh, the sectors and industries prioritized. So we're hoping that with all of the positive development, especially in passing this economic stimulus bills, extending the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, that education will be included in also in the alleviation measures of the government.
Wow, and good luck. I hope that happens. Well, thank you again, Attorney Estrada, for your time. And please let us know if there are other issues that arise later on that we should be paying attention to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, partner, and to everyone at the Manila Times. And keep safe, and hope to see you all soon in person.